I am Maddie. At 17, most people dream about senior prom or taking road trips with friends. But not me. I spend most of my time sitting in a quiet room, staring at an old photo of me and Taylor. I wonder how a human heart can break into so many pieces and still find the strength to beat. Taylor wasn't just my best friend. She was the other half of my soul. From the first time we met when we were 9 years old, Taylor and I were inseparable. People used to call us twins because we went everywhere and did everything together. When we were 12, Taylor's family had to move to a different town. I cried so much and begged my parents to move our house to follow her family. I couldn't imagine life without Taylor. My parents gave in to my wishes and agreed, so we continued our journey together. Taylor was the kind of person everyone loved the moment they met her. She had blue eyes, soft brown hair, and a smile that always made you feel at ease. But what I truly admired was the way she was always kind to everyone. She was always warm and good-hearted, and I cherished every moment we spent together. Taylor spent a lot of time at my house, sometimes even more than at her own. Taylor often stayed the night, and on some nights, she would hold me and cry. I asked her why, but she just shook her head, not wanting to talk. Once, past midnight, Taylor unexpectedly knocked on my door with terror in her eyes, saying she needed to stay over. I never refused. I just held her and tried to make her feel safe. I knew something bad must have been happening. One day, Taylor showed me an Instagram account. The name was Brad Wright. The profile showed a perfect man, a sharp jawline, stunning blue eyes, broad shoulders, and a very confident vibe. Brad messaged her constantly, always starting conversations and complimenting Taylor. What stood out was Brad's patience, waiting for a response from Taylor even though it had been 3 weeks with no luck. Taylor laughed and said it was just for fun, but I could see she was flustered every time he was mentioned. Brad even said he lived in the same town as us, so I told Taylor to consider meeting him. A perfect guy like that was worth talking to, right? But then, Taylor disappeared. I couldn't believe it. She wasn't the type of person to leave without saying a word. Her mother and her stepfather were frantic, searching everywhere. I joined the townspeople to form a search party, looking from small alleys to the woods on the edge of town. Every time someone called out Taylor's name, a spark of hope lit up in me. I hoped she would appear and explain that everything was just a misunderstanding. A week later, volunteers found Taylor in the woods on the outskirts of town. She was gone. I collapsed when I heard the news. The sense of loss felt like it was suffocating my heart. When the details of the crime scene were revealed, I vomited from disgust and pain. My Taylor, that beautiful, kind girl, had been destroyed in the most haunting way possible. Her nose was shattered, and her face was distorted from a brutal beating. Her clothes. The killer had intentionally humiliated her even after she had passed away. Her upper body was torn because of wild animals, and there was a strong smell of bleach mixed with the scent of decay. The police started their investigation. I provided information about Brad Wright, hoping the perfect guy from Instagram would be caught. I hoped that would be the clue to the truth. But when the truth came out, it was even more sickening than death. The Brad Wright account didn't exist. The pictures were fake. The person behind those sweet messages, the one who patiently waited for Taylor for weeks, the one who lured her into the woods to commit that monstrous act, was Taylor's stepfather. I felt a double betrayal, losing my best friend and realizing the killer was someone we trusted. Taylor's stepfather was actually just her mother's boyfriend, as they had only known each other for a few months. He had a scary appearance, but his sincere gestures and words had made me think differently. Taylor had run to me for safety, but I didn't fully understand what she was trying to hide. That sick and depraved stepfather was sentenced to life in prison, but my Taylor will never come back. Pain and anger fill me, but the only thing I can do is tell her story. I want to make sure no one else has to experience the pain Taylor endured. Taylor will forever be the most beautiful part of my youth, and I will always remember her. Her story will not be forgotten. This story is based on the tragic true crime case of a young woman named Justice Marie Garrett, which took place in April 2018. The perpetrator was Robert Bobby Kern. He claimed to be Justice's stepfather, but he was actually just her mother's boyfriend. Their relationship had not been going on for very long at the time. According to her best friend Rochelle, Justice often avoided going home. Instead, she stayed overnight at Rochelle's house as much as possible. Both Justice and Rochelle were deeply intimidated by Kern. His scary appearance and behavior made them feel uneasy every time they saw him. On the day she went missing, the predator claimed he was driving Justice to school. In reality, this was a trap. He had planned the ride so he could carry out a depraved and violent attack on her. This story highlights a serious and ongoing issue in society regarding the hidden dangers young women face. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the people closest to a family can be the most dangerous and difficult criminals to stop. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you. MHS crossed over 10,000 subscribers in 2025, and that's all because of you. Every single view, like, and share means the world to me. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. This year, we're setting our sights on 50,000 in 2026. So if you enjoy these videos and haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that button, join the community, let's grow this together. Now, back to the stories. My name is Robert, and I live in a small town in Georgia. This story happened back in 2012. I was 22 at the time, fresh out of community college and working part-time at a tire shop in Mayfield Hollow. I had two best friends, Kyle Morgan and Sean Turner. Kyle was the kind of guy who commanded the room the second he walked in. He was reckless, impulsive, always had some get-rich-quick scheme, and possessed an irresistible charm. Sean, on the other hand, was the calmest person I ever knew. He was the anchor that kept our friendship from drifting away into Kyle's crazy ideas. That February, we decided to spend a weekend fishing on the Apalachicola River. Kyle excitedly bragged that he had borrowed an aluminum fishing boat, but when he showed up with it, the thing was shockingly old and beat up. Kyle was at the helm, constantly cracking jokes about creepy creatures lurking in the dark water and the bodies of drowned people that were never found. Sean's face went pale listening to those stories, but Kyle didn't care. He just kept driving the boat in circles around the brush, looking for the perfect fishing spot. 3 hours passed without a single bite. Kyle started getting cranky. He began driving aggressively, revving the engine and making sharp turns to churn up the water. And then, the nightmare happened. The boat tilted hard. Sean lost his balance and tumbled into the river. At first, I thought it was just a typical fall, but then Sean started screaming that he didn't know how to swim. I quickly turned to Kyle, waiting for him to react. In that split second, Kyle's face froze. It was an expression of total emptiness, a coldness that sent shivers down my spine. Then he acted. He revved the engine and turned the boat back toward Sean, but he went too fast. The side of the boat slammed into Sean's head with a sickening crack, and he sank instantly. We both jumped into the water immediately, diving into the murky depths to find him, but it was hopeless. The river was like a black curtain. We couldn't see a thing. It took 3 days for the dive team to find Sean's body. He had drifted miles downstream. Kyle told the police it was a tragic accident caused by a lapse in judgment while driving the boat. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter. During that time, I tried to convince myself that Kyle was just a careless guy, that the coldness I saw on his face was just a figment of my panicked imagination. But when Kyle got out of prison, things took a much darker turn. He contacted me, his voice still full of that high energy. He said he wanted things to go back to the way they were because I was his only friend left. We met up. At first, everything seemed normal. But then Kyle started asking me to go to strange places, remote trails deep in the woods or abandoned hunting cabins miles from anyone. Every time we were out there, he would say things that made my blood run cold. Kyle talked about how easy it would be to make someone disappear in a place like that. If someone screamed in these woods, not a single soul would hear them, he'd say. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just a twisted joke. but Kyle's eyes were cold and calculating, like he was measuring my reaction. Another time, he described in graphic detail an idea he had: digging a deep pit in the mountains, filling it with piranhas, and throwing a living person in just to see what happened. He said he had researched them and knew they could strip a human to the bone in minutes. His voice sounded genuinely excited. The breaking point was when Kyle proposed a business idea for the deep web. He talked about filming mukbang videos, but instead of normal food, the person would be eating human flesh. He was dead serious, saying people would pay millions of dollars to watch stuff like that. Right then, I knew I had to get away from him. This wasn't the friend I used to know. I blocked his number, moved to a different city, and tried to forget everything. Years passed and I built a new life for myself, but the past wouldn't let go. One day, I got a call from an unknown number in Orlando. It was Kyle. His voice was weak and raspy. He told me he had terminal cancer. "The doctors say I only have a few weeks. I want to see you one last time." I agreed. When I walked into that hospital room, I barely recognized him. He was skin and bones, with wires and tubes snaking out of his arms, connecting him to the machines keeping him alive. When he saw me, he smiled. I felt a lump in my throat. He whispered about the good old days we used to have. Then he confessed to killing Sean. He explained that he had lost a huge fish because Sean was fumbling with the anchor, and it made him fly into a silent rage. At first, he just wanted to scare Sean, but when Sean fell into the water, Kyle saw an opportunity. He knew exactly what he was doing when he steered the boat into our drowning friend. I sat there in shock, unable to do anything but listen to the horrific truth. Then Kyle chuckled. Sean wasn't the only one. There were 5 in total. It turned out all those weird stories he told me were true. They weren't ideas. They were things he had actually done. I left the hospital in a daze. During the entire meeting, I hadn't been able to utter a single word. Kyle died a week later. I didn't go to the funeral, and I didn't send flowers. Many years have gone by, but every night I still wonder, how much of a dying man's confession is the truth? Was Kyle Morgan a real serial killer, or just a psychopath who wanted to plant one last seed of terror in the heart of the only friend he had left? I don't know, and honestly, I don't think I want to.
My name is Adam, 30 years old, living in a quiet small town in Ohio. I worked as an amateur private investigator, mostly taking on small jobs from online forums. I needed the money, and that was the only reason I agreed to a job from a man named Dale last October. He wanted me to find his younger sister Annie, who had gone missing 12 years earlier. I met Dale at a roadside cafe. The moment I saw him, he gave off an uncomfortable, physically unclean impression. He had thick, messy black hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in days, a wrinkled old sweatshirt with a brown stain on the chest, and a heavy body odor so strong that I had to take shallow breaths just to stay focused. Dale told me he was a final year medical student and was taking care of sick family members. But the trembling in his voice, the dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, and the foul smell on his breath made me doubt every word. I saw someone who was desperate, obsessed, and completely lost. He handed me an old, blurry photograph of a little girl, about 2 or 3 years old. She was staring straight into the camera with big, innocent eyes, and he said that was Annie. Everything felt suspicious, a huge disconnect between the story he was telling and the man standing in front of me. But I looked at the thick envelope he gave me, a deposit worth 2 months' rent, and told myself, this is just another hopeless missing person case. It would lead nowhere, but I'd still get paid. I took the deposit and began the job. 10 days later, my skepticism turned into horror. I moved to the neighborhood where Dale lived, hoping to find more clues about his family's past. There, I met Mr. Walker, a recently moved-in neighbor. He was a polite, middle-aged man who seemed very familiar with the area. While talking, I mentioned Dale. Walker froze, frowned, then slowly told me things that stunned me. Dale's parents died 12 years ago in a car accident. Dale was not a medical student. He was studying welding at a technical school. And most importantly, he's severely traumatized. And I don't recall him ever having a younger sister. Walker told the story calmly and confidently, completely shaking the foundation of everything Dale had told me. I decided to investigate Dale more closely. I checked his technical school. A classmate told me that Dale often brought 3 large dolls to class. He treated them like children, and one of them he called Annie. I was shocked, but arrived at a comforting conclusion. Dale had suffered severe psychological trauma after his parents' death and some kind of personal loss, which led him to develop delusions and create a doll family to cope. I thought, at least he isn't a criminal. I'm just taking money from a broken man. That eased my nerves somewhat. During a progress call with Dale, I casually dropped some small talk to justify my lack of progress. "Looks like someone new just moved into your area," I said. "I saw some moving trucks not long ago. Probably a young family with a little girl or something." It was a harmless throwaway comment, but for someone like Dale, that sentence lit a dangerous spark. I didn't know I had just unknowingly handed him a target right next door. That night, around 11 p.m., I heard a loud scream coming from Walker's house. I ran outside and saw police pinning Dale to the ground. He had been caught trying to pull Walker's daughter, a little girl named Mandy, into his old car. Dale, being restrained by 2 officers, was still screaming in desperation, calling the girl Annie. In that moment, a chill ran down my spine. I realized my careless remark had triggered Dale's kidnapping attempt. After Dale was arrested, I knew I had to do something to redeem myself. I sought out Shirley, the neighborhood association president, who held all the secrets of this small town. Ms. Shirley confirmed that Dale's family did have a 2 to 3-year-old girl who was kidnapped 12 years ago, and Dale's parents died from the shock. So, Dale really did have a sister. But then, she said something that hit me like a lightning strike. The Walkers moved away right after the kidnapping, and only recently returned. Their real daughter died shortly before Annie went missing. They left to cope with the grief. The girl they're raising now, Mandy, she's not their biological child. My entire world spun. Walker's calm insistence that Dale had no sister was a lie. He had lied to me. What else had he lied about? I rushed home, retrieving Dale's old photo of Annie. I zoomed in on it on my computer, staring at the girl's face. I noticed she had 3 tiny moles, arranged in a triangle on her neck. My heart pounded. I drove straight to Mandy's school. I stood at the gate, waiting. When little Mandy walked out, I watched closely. Exactly those 3 moles, arranged in a triangle. I stood frozen in shock. So Mandy was Annie. The Walker family were the kidnappers. I started piecing everything together. The Walkers' real daughter died 12 years ago. The Walkers kidnapped Annie, renamed her Mandy, and raised her as their own daughter to fill the void of their loss. I found the final answer in the secluded outskirts where the old town cemetery lay. In a hidden corner, I found a small, well-cared-for grave with an old stone angel statue. The grave belonged to Mandy Walker, died 12 years ago. That was undeniable proof of their motive. Why did Walker return? Most likely, after 12 years they thought things had settled down, and they returned so Annie, now Mandy, could live near the fake grave they created. I immediately handed over all the information and evidence to the police. Dale, a damaged young man labeled by the community as a delusional doll fanatic, was arrested for kidnapping. But in reality, he was trying to rescue his true little sister. The kidnapping case from 12 years ago and the walker's horrifying cover-up were exposed, all because a brother never gave up on his sister. I once thought a mother's greatest pain was losing a child. But for me, that pain was the beginning of the most terrifying and haunting period of my life. I'm Beth. I live in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, with my husband Mike and our 17-year-old son, Kevin. Our lives were peaceful until that July night. Around 2 a.m., a terrifying explosion shook the entire house. The pungent smell of smoke filled the bedroom from under the door. I quickly pushed Mike awake. "The house is on fire," I screamed. Mike leapt out of bed, opening the bedroom door. Flames were already high, the wooden staircase ablaze. Thick black smoke billowed, making it hard to breathe. We crawled on the floor, trying to escape through the window. "Kevin! Where's Kevin?" my husband shouted. Kevin's bedroom was at the end of the hallway. I saw Mike rush towards it despite the spreading flames. I wanted to follow, but the smoke was too thick. I couldn't breathe anymore. I had to climb out the window, falling into the bushes below. I stood on the lawn in front of the house, watching the flames devour our home. The wail of fire trucks echoed in the distance. Mike was brought out by rescuers from the second-story window, his hands and face covered in burn marks. But he was alone. Our son was nowhere to be seen. "Kevin! Where's Kevin?" I screamed. Mike shook his head, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead. "I couldn't find him." The world seemed to collapse around me. I couldn't accept the reality at that moment. Kevin was still in there, in that fire, waiting for me to save him. I had to go in there. I had to find my son. "Kevin!" I screamed and lunged towards the burning house. Mike and a firefighter had to hold me back. "Let me go." "My son is in there." I struggled and wailed his name. Mike and I embraced, crying loudly. A few hours later, when daylight broke and the fire had completely subsided, only a pile of charred ashes remained. The rescue team searched through the ashes, but found no sign of Kevin's body. I huddled in the back seat of the ambulance, my mind in a strange, blank state. We searched very thoroughly, but the fire was too large, coupled with the high temperature, especially in Kevin's bedroom area. At such temperatures, even bones can be incinerated into ash. The words from a rescue worker made me completely break down. I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Coleman. We believe Kevin perished in the fire. Mrs. Coleman, I know this is very hard to accept." No, no. My son is not dead. You have to keep looking," I screamed. Mike hugged me, but this pain was inconsolable. The first few weeks were terrible. Mike was hospitalized for his burns. I stayed with my sister, but every day I drove back to the house. I couldn't accept that Kevin was dead. I dug through the ashes, searching for any remnant of my son. I lost 10 pounds in just 3 weeks and had to constantly take sleeping pills and tranquilizers. After a month, when I could finally accept the truth, we started clearing the debris to rebuild the house. I continued searching. In the rubble of Kevin's room, I found his half-burnt desk. The bottom drawer was still partially intact. Inside, I found a notebook that had been slightly burned, but the remaining pages were still legible. My heart pounded as I realized it was Kevin's diary. I clutched the notebook to my chest, the pain making me burst into tears. After a moment, I took a deep breath and opened the diary. February 15th. Today I attended my first meeting. I understand that only we truly grasp the truth and can cleanse the world. I reread that sentence 3 times. My hands trembled as I turned to another page. February 28th. Jake taught me how to make a bomb. He said we had to act soon. The church is the first target. We will cleanse the world of hypocrites. I couldn't breathe. That's where we used to take Kevin for Mass every Sunday. He used to sing in the choir. I continued reading. March 10th. The bomb is ready. I hid it in my bedroom. Tomorrow we will place it at the church. I threw the notebook to the ground and crawled away. I understood what had happened. Could it be? The bomb Kevin made had unexpectedly exploded in his bedroom. He died instantly, and his body was... The explosion caused the fire that consumed the entire house. I wailed from the deepest part of my pain. My son was a terrorist, a member of some extremist cult. I had failed as a mother. I didn't know what my own child was thinking. "What did you find, Beth?" Mike's question startled me. I quickly hid the diary in my bag. Just a few of Kevin's belongings left. I'm picking them up." That night, I burned the diary. I couldn't tell Mike everything. He had suffered enough. We still had to continue our lives in this small town. I would bury and end everything here. Watching the pages burn to ash, carrying Kevin's horrific secret. But I knew this wasn't the end. I had a responsibility to do something to atone for my son. I started volunteering at a youth counseling center. I wanted to help lost children who could easily be drawn into cults like Kevin. Every night I still dream of Kevin, then wake up haunted by how I failed as a mother. Perhaps that's the punishment I have to endure, not just to lose my child, but to live with the truth that my child could have become a murderer. And perhaps that's also the only way for me to find meaning in life again. I will try my best so that no other child will go down the path Kevin took. Some sounds just bring back the past, no matter how hard you try to forget. The sound I fear and am most haunted by is the chirping of cicadas. It reminds me of a horrifying summer 13 years ago. I was 12 then, living with my parents in a small town in the San Joaquin Valley, California. Summer days there were hot and quiet, with only the incessant chirping of cicadas echoing from the old eucalyptus trees. Next to our house lived Mrs. Morris. She was around 60, with thinning gray hair. She lived alone in a small house at the end of the street. At first, I didn't pay much attention to Mrs. Morris. She was just a quiet old neighbor I occasionally saw watering her garden in the early morning. But gradually I started noticing strange things. One night, I woke up thirsty. Through my bedroom window, I accidentally saw Mrs. Morris standing in the middle of her yard in the shadow of the moonlight. She was whispering something. No one else was around. A few other nights, the scene repeated. Mrs. Morris wandered in her yard with empty eyes, muttering sentences I couldn't clearly hear. Sometimes she would stop, her head tilted to one side, as if listening for someone to reply. Then she would nod and continue whispering. I was scared but didn't tell my parents, choosing instead to close my window tightly and draw the curtains forever. As time passed, I gradually forgot about her strange behavior. Mrs. Morris never seemed to do anything harmful anyway. Aside from the strange neighbor, life in my family's neighborhood was very peaceful. Our house was near a paved road that gently sloped downhill. Every afternoon, I would take my rollerblades to that slope to skate. It was my favorite part of the day. At the bottom of the slope, there was a large moss-green truck parked on the side of the road. The truck was old, its paint peeling in many places, and its bed covered with a dark blue tarp. I usually rollerbladed down to it and then back up, repeating until I was tired. That fateful afternoon, I decided to try rollerblading down the slope as fast as I could. My mom had warned me many times about going too fast, but I never listened. The asphalt was scorching hot under my rollerblade wheels. The warm wind blew through my hair as I sped down the hill. I felt free and exhilarated, until I saw a small dog run across the road right in front of me. I braked hard, losing my balance. Realizing I was about to fall, I could only squeeze my eyes shut and scream. I slowly opened my eyes, sitting up slowly in a daze. Then I was startled to realize I was underneath the truck. The smell of oil and rubber mixed together made the air incredibly suffocating. I gasped for breath, just needing to crawl out. But as I looked around, I was drawn to some white strands gently fluttering in the breeze. Long, soft strands, clinging to something stuck between the two rear wheels. Out of curiosity, I crawled closer. At first, I only saw a pale, round shape, thinking it was a ball or some toy. But when I looked closer, a pair of eyes staring straight back at me. Below them was a nose, one side completely mangled, a wide-open mouth with the tongue lolling out. My entire body froze, my mouth dry, scared but unable to tear my eyes away from that face. Then I realized, Mrs. Morris. Just then, as if hearing her name, Mrs. Morris's head tilted to one side. The creaking sound from her neck bones sent a shiver down my spine. Her body was wedged between the axle and the road, her floral dress torn, her limbs bent at unnatural angles. Blood had dried to a dark brown on the pavement. I screamed and crawled out from under the truck as fast as I could. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably when I got home, my heart pounding as if it would explode. "Mom! Dad!" I yelled as I burst into the house. "Mrs. Morris... My mom looked worried, seeing my panicked state. "What's wrong, sweetie?" "Under the truck. Mrs. Morris is under the truck," I cried, trying to explain. My dad ran outside. A few minutes later, he returned with a pale face and immediately called the police. The police arrived, cordoned off the scene, and removed Mrs. Morris's body. They asked for basic information and instructed everyone not to approach the area. A few days later, the investigation results were released in the local newspaper. According to the report, Mrs. Morris had been suffering from severe insomnia and depression for many years. Inside her home, police found many empty pill bottles and disorganized notes. The autopsy results showed an unusually high concentration of sleeping pills in her blood. The police concluded, on the night of the accident, Mrs. Morris was sleepless and wandering around in a dazed state. A neighbor's camera recorded Mrs. Morris wandering the night the accident happened. Police analyzed the camera footage and concluded that Mrs. Morris was very likely in a dazed state and lay down under Mr. James's car without realizing it. As for Mr. James, he testified that on the night of the accident, he received a complaint from a resident on the street about his car blocking part of a pathway. He went back to his car to move it forward a bit. While driving, he felt a slight bump, but he dismissed it, thinking it was just a rock or a branch. He was not prosecuted, as this was deemed a tragic accident with no signs of negligence. I never rollerbladed on that slope again. My family moved when I was 17. Mrs. Morris's house is still there, abandoned with boarded-up windows. And on hot summer nights, when I hear the cicadas chirping, I still remember the pungent smell of engine oil from under the truck. Most horrifyingly, every narrow gap makes me see Mrs. Morris's distorted face and long gray hair. Looking back now, I understand that those times I saw Mrs. Morris wandering at night and whispering to herself were signs of the psychological illness she was enduring. Perhaps she struggled with insomnia and loneliness for years, until it led to that tragic end. I used to believe the small town where I was born was the safest place on earth. But then, one autumn night last year, a terrifying secret was uncovered that shook the entire town. What haunts me the most is who was behind it. I work as an accountant for a small oil and gas company in Marfa, Texas. It's a small town near the Mexican border. Everyone knows everyone. One of my mechanic friends is Roy. His garage is right in the center of town. I always thought Roy was a kind and gentle man. Not just me, but the whole town loved Roy. Until last autumn, when an incident changed the way I saw everyone around me. I had just finished my shift and was on my way home. I stopped to get gas. Across the street, I saw a chaotic scene. The area was cordoned off. There were many police cars and sirens wailed loudly. Then, I saw a woman wrapped in a blanket. A police officer was leading her away. The woman looked like she had just returned from hell. Her pants were torn, her hair was disheveled, and her face was gaunt. I froze, realizing that the place she had just come from was Roy's auto shop. In the very next second, seeing Roy handcuffed in the back of a police car, head bowed, shocked me. That evening, the whole town was buzzing about what happened with Roy, and I was no exception. The town's resident chat group exploded. Messages kept popping up. Everyone was talking excitedly. From the snippets of information in the messages, I learned that the woman's name was Hannah, a cashier at the local supermarket. She had only moved to town a short while ago and had been missing for 2 weeks. Everyone thought she had gone to visit family in Dallas. But what had really happened, we didn't know. It was all just speculation. 2 days later, the local newspaper published an article with a headline that sent shivers down my spine. Local mechanic accused of abduction and torture. It was just as everyone had suspected. The girl was Hannah. She had been held captive by Roy in a secret room behind his garage for 2 weeks. Hannah recounted that Roy had lured her into the garage, claiming her car had an urgent problem that needed to be checked. What Hannah described stunned me. The room where Hannah was held was completely soundproofed, with surveillance cameras in every corner. On a shelf were videotapes labeled with different dates and the names of dozens of women. Among them was Jessica, a young and beautiful girl who was well known in town. Jessica had disappeared 3 years ago. Everyone thought Jessica had left town to pursue her acting dream in Austin. But now we knew the truth. The police also found a notebook belonging to Roy that detailed everyone's habits. He knew their exact work hours, when they came home, when they went shopping. Roy even recorded private conversations he had overheard. But that was only half of the horror, because those were the victims Roy had successfully executed his plan on. In the days after Roy's arrest, many other women came forward, stating they had been followed or approached by Roy. But as a beloved and trusted figure in the community, it was hard for people to unmask him. I started to recall the signs I had overlooked. Roy always asked too many questions about everyone's private lives. He could recount detailed schedules for anyone in town. At the time, I thought Roy was just a neighbor who cared, but now I understand it was a sign of systematic stalking. I suddenly remembered a detail from about a month ago. I was coming home late after a date with Sam and saw the silhouette of a man standing near her house. When I looked closer, the person had vanished. Now I'm sure it was Roy. It's terrifying that Roy had lived among us for years, receiving absolute respect and trust. The trial took place 6 months later, with many town residents and Roy's would-be victims present. He sat silently throughout the proceedings, showing no emotion. When his lawyer asked why he did those things, Roy simply said, "I wanted to understand them." He offered no complex defenses or explanations. Roy's statement silenced the entire courtroom. He didn't see women as human beings, but merely as subjects to study and control. Hannah left town right after the trial. Roy was sentenced to 25 years. His garage was demolished a month later. Now, it's just a gravel lot with weeds growing on it. The town of Marfa is not the same anymore. People have become more vigilant. Casual conversations on the streets have become less frequent. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger in the dark, but the neighbor with a friendly smile. I learned that intuition never lies. If something makes you feel uncomfortable about a person, no matter how small, listen to it. Because sometimes the smallest details are signs of something far more dangerous. My name is Alex. I grew up in the quiet town of Ardmore, Pennsylvania. There wasn't much to do there, so finding something fun was always a challenge. When I was in high school, my 3 friends and I often snuck into old abandoned buildings to explore. It was something we loved to do. It wasn't until many years later that I realized that urban exploration is actually a pretty common thing. There was an abandoned church in town that we had visited a few times before. It was creepy, but it was our go-to spot whenever we were looking for a thrill late at night. One chilly fall evening, the air was cool and crisp. We decided to visit the church and have a few drinks inside. The church was behind an 8-foot-high chain-link fence, so we had to climb over it. All of the doors were boarded up, so we always had to enter through a side window. When we got inside, the first thing we noticed was that the floor was strange. The first floor was just dirt, like someone had removed all of the floorboards a long time ago. It left a deep hole in the middle with concrete steps leading down to the basement. We always hung out in that basement. The basement had 3 rooms, but only one had a door. The other 2 were just door frames. The first room we entered was the biggest. There wasn't much in it besides a few old pieces of furniture, broken chairs, and a tattered couch. I remember having to remind my friend Max to be quiet at least a dozen times because he was drunk and getting loud. Still, being in a group was an advantage, and I felt safer knowing there were a few of us together. We drank and laughed as usual. We may have even had music playing, but I don't remember clearly. Then suddenly a door slammed shut. The sound was so loud it startled me. We froze, looking at each other nervously. At first I thought maybe one of us had accidentally closed the door, or that it was just the wind, but nobody was close to it. Immediately my friends Luna and Allie panicked and took off. They flew up the stairs, leaving me and Max behind. I didn't want to leave right away. My heart was pounding, I admit, but I didn't want to let the sound scare me. Max looked at my friends leaving, then looked at me and gave me a silly smile. I knew he was just drunk, not brave. After a few minutes of standing in silence, we decided to investigate. I tiptoed to the door that had just slammed shut and opened it. Behind it was a small room. Max walked past me and went into the room with a carefree look on his face, as if nothing was strange. He touched a dusty wooden table and shook his head, then even sat down in a chair next to it, relaxing as if he were in a familiar place. I walked in and looked around. Besides the table and chairs, there was a wooden shelf. On it was a mirror with some red stains on the surface. At first, I thought it was old paint or something similar, but when I got closer, I noticed something horrifying. They weren't completely dry. The stains were still sticky. I felt the hair on my arms stand up and started to regret not leaving sooner. Clearly, someone or something had been in this room recently. Then, I saw an old photo on the shelf. It was a black and white picture of a woman in a wedding dress. I backed away, and just as I turned, I heard another sound. This time it wasn't a door. It was coming from one of the other rooms, the big room in the basement that we had just left. At this point, I decided it was time to leave. I quickly grabbed our stuff and pulled Max out of there as fast as I could. He was just a body moving, but his mind was asleep, and it took a lot of effort to pull him. I took a deep breath and slapped Max hard to get him to wake up. Then I pushed him to go first. Luna and Allie were still outside waiting for us. When I climbed over the fence and put my feet on the sidewalk, none of us said a word. Before we left, I looked back, and I swear I saw a person's silhouette standing in the open window frame. I still pray that, by some small chance, my mind was playing tricks on me, but I'll never know for sure. I never went back to that church again. Many years later, I went back and found that the church had been completely demolished. I still can't find an explanation for what happened that night. I'm glad my friends were there to witness it with me. If I had been alone, I would have doubted the whole thing. I grew up in a small town in Nebraska, where everyone knows your name and your family's business. Even now, at 28, the memory of what happened when I was 14 still haunts me. Back then, Halloween was the day I looked forward to most all year. It wasn't just about the candy anymore. It was about the fun of coming up with mischievous ways to mess with Mr. Harlan. Mr. Harlan lived in an old brick house right on the edge of the road, just before the street disappeared into the vast cornfields. He was in his late 70s, always wore high-waisted dress pants, and hated kids, especially me and my older brother Kyle. Every Halloween, teasing him became a favorite job for us. I remember most of the things we did. In 5th grade, we toilet papered his whole front porch. In 6th grade, we put a fake snake in his mailbox. By 8th grade, we were putting severed rubber arms in his yard, setting off stink bombs under his window, and Kyle even rigged a speaker to play random screams from the bushes. Every time he was messed with, Mr. Harlan would rush out with his flashlight and scream threats. But nothing ever happened. He never called our parents or the police, just mumbled something about getting us back. We thought he was just talk. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday and it was warm, which was perfect for staying out late. Kyle and I had been planning our grand finale of pranks for weeks, but as we walked past Mr. Harlan's house at sunset, we noticed something weird. Paper skeletons taped to the windows, an inflatable pumpkin in the yard, twinkling lights on the porch. It looked cheap, like someone had just bought a Halloween kit and thrown everything up at once. But the notable thing was, Mr. Harlan never decorated. Kyle nudged me and said, "He's trying to outdo us. We can't let him win." We waited until late at night, when most trick-or-treaters were gone and the street was quiet. Kyle brought a bag full of tools, nothing dangerous, just our usual stuff: smoke bombs, a motion-activated soundbox, and a plastic doll painted with fake blood. We sneaked through Mr. Harlan's backyard, keeping low behind the row of bushes along his fence. Everything was dark, except for the faint orange glow from the porch. There was no noise, not even the static radio he usually kept on. I whispered, "This feels wrong." Kyle just grinned, tossed me the soundbox and said, "That's the point, let's mess it up." We split up like always. Kyle went around to the shed near the back fence, while I stayed closer to the house. I was trying to find a good place to hide the soundbox when I noticed something strange. The pumpkin on the porch was slowly deflating, like someone had stabbed it. But no one was around. I figured it had a tear. I crouched low behind a bush, waiting for Kyle's flashlight to flash. That's when I heard the shed door open, followed by a loud clank, like something heavy had slammed shut. Then everything went silent again. I waited for a few minutes. I whispered Kyle's name, but there was no answer. I stood up and crept toward the shed. The padlock on the door was secured shut. I tapped lightly on the door and called Kyle's name. No reply. I knocked harder. Still silence. Then I noticed a small camera mounted high in the corner of the shed, flashing red. Right below it, a piece of cardboard read, "Tricked." It hit me then that this was the prank on us. Harlan had turned the tables. I backed away, looking around the yard, expecting him to leap out of the shadows. But no one was there, just a tense silence. I pulled on the shed lock. It wouldn't budge. I tried to smash it with a rock, but it only made a useless clanking sound. From inside, I thought I heard a faint noise, like Kyle was muffled or trying to move. Panic started to spread through my body. I ran back out to the street. I stood frozen under the streetlight. I had two choices: go get help, which meant waking up my parents or the cops and having to admit we had been harassing Harlan, or go back and save Kyle before dawn. I stood there looking at the dark house, the creepy feeling sinking in as I realized we were in too deep, way past what we had ever imagined. I decided I couldn't leave Kyle. I ran back, heart pounding. I used the screwdriver to pry the hinge bolts from the outside. It took forever, but I finally got it open. Kyle was sitting on the floor, pale, with his knees pulled up to his chest. Inside the shed, dozens of photos were taped all over the walls. Astonishingly, they were all pictures of my brother and me over the years. Us in our costumes, walking past his house, even some taken secretly through our bedroom windows. Harlan hadn't hurt Kyle. He had just locked him in, surrounded by the photos. That was Harlan's message. "I've been watching, letting everything build up, and this is your punishment." We didn't say anything. We just ran. Since that night, we never set foot near Harlan's house again. He didn't call the police, nor did he ever mention it again. I never forgot that evening. We ran home like crazy, Kyle gasping for breath, and me shaking and speechless. That night, we lay still in our room, unable to sleep, and for the first time, I saw my brother cry. Kyle whispered, "We went too far, didn't we?" I nodded, the guilt feeling like a rock in my chest. I realized all the mischief we had done wasn't harmless kid stuff anymore. We had been hurting and messing with a lonely old man's life for years, just to satisfy our own thrill. Kyle and I decided to stop and apologize. We wrote a letter, leaving it on Mr. Harlan's doorstep. "We're sorry for everything. We won't do it again." Mr. Harlan didn't reply, but from then on, every Halloween he decorated his house as usual, and we just quietly walked past. Now, at 28, every time I recall it, I still feel scared. The fear isn't from Mr. Harlan, but because of my own carelessness and impulsiveness back then. I understood that seemingly harmless pranks can leave real wounds on others. and Mr. Harlan's silent retaliation was the deepest lesson I ever got. Consequences always come sooner or later, and empathy is always harder than impulse. Now I tell this story so we can understand that some pranks aren't jokes, and sometimes, just by putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, we can save them and ourselves a lot of pain. My great-grandmother used to tell me a strange story about something she experienced when she was young. At the time, she was married with 4 children. Her family lived in the small town of Quartzsite, Arizona. One afternoon, she was cleaning the farm. Her sister, Eliza, went out to get water from the creek. Their 2 families lived together in the sparsely populated and dangerous American West. Suddenly, the family dogs started to bark fiercely outside. Normally, they were very gentle and rarely barked for no reason. She went to the porch to see what was happening. She saw them barking at a large sand dune in front of the house. Then she saw a huge creature. It had 4 legs and red fur. Its back was twisted. It appeared on top of the dune and came down toward her house. On the back of the creature was a man. But he didn't look normal. His face was horrible and gaunt. His mouth was stretched into a wide smile. And he had no eyes. As a very religious person, she immediately thought it was the devil. He was riding a red creature to come and take her and her family. She ran into the house. She blocked the door with a kitchen table. She gathered her 4 children and prayed. While she was praying, she heard a sharp, terrified scream from outside. She realized it was Eliza's voice. Even though she was terrified and worried about her sister, she didn't dare to go outside. She had to protect her children. A few hours later, the husbands came back from herding sheep. She cried as she told them about the devil and Eliza's disappearance. The 2 men immediately grabbed their guns and oil lamps and went to look for her. They found Eliza near the creek. She was lying face down on the ground. Blood was everywhere. Eliza's body looked like it had been trampled to death. There were many large hoof prints around. My great-grandfather rode his horse into town to tell the sheriff. When the investigator arrived at the scene, he confirmed that Eliza had been trampled to death. The hoof prints left on the ground were too big to be from any horse. My great-grandmother told them the story about seeing the devil and the red-furred creature, but the investigators didn't believe the part about the devil. In the end, Eliza's cause of death was recorded as unknown. From then on, the story of the devil spread throughout the Arizona frontier. People named it the Red Demon. At first, most people didn't believe it was true. They thought it was just a rumor or an exaggeration. However, over time, reports of seeing the Red Demon became more frequent and stranger. She heard many campers say that the red ghost had trampled on their tents. One cowboy claimed to have caught it with his lasso around its neck. But the red ghost ran so hard that it dragged him and forced him to let go. After Eliza's death, she looked out the window one day and saw the Red Demon standing in her turnip garden. My great-grandfather decided he would shoot it dead if he had the chance. After many days of waiting, they saw the red ghost once again. My great-grandfather immediately grabbed his rifle and fired shot after shot at the red ghost until it fell. When they ran out to check, they realized that all the stories about this creature were wrong. The creature was not a monster. It was a camel. It had red fur, a long neck, and a hump on its back. The rider was not the devil. It was the decomposing corpse of a man. The flesh and eyes had rotted off his face. This made him look like he had no eyes and had a wide smile. They didn't know who the man was. They also didn't know how he died. The strange thing was that even though he was dead, his body was still sitting upright on the camel's back. He never fell off. This is what created the scary image of a devil. It wasn't until many years later that people started to understand the truth. The U.S. Army had brought camels to the west from the Mediterranean region to transport goods across the desert. But the U.S. Army was not familiar with how to care for and manage them. The outbreak of the Civil War also caused the project to be abandoned. The camels were either released or sold. Some still existed in the wild in the American Southwest desert. For the people of Arizona at the time, who had never seen these animals outside of books, it was not surprising that they mistook a camel for a monster. My great-grandmother said that from that day on, She no longer believed that all scary things came from hell. Sometimes, it's people and forgetfulness that create the most terrifying ghosts. She lived the rest of her life with regret for not running out when she heard her sister scream. But deep down, she still believed she had done the right thing to protect her children. And every time she retold the story, she would look far away and say softly, "There are some things that look like a devil, but are really just the consequence of a quiet, lonely death in the desert." One August afternoon last year, all it took was a faint knocking sound from an abandoned house to shatter all my beliefs. The perpetrator of the most brutal crime was the person I trusted the most. I'm Elton, the police chief of Sedona, Arizona. For over 15 years of serving here, I've always been proud of this small community. Everyone knows and trusts each other, and the most serious crimes are just land disputes or assaults from drunken fights. That afternoon, I received a call from a family who had just moved into the neighborhood. The woman's voice was filled with anxiety, saying there were strange noises coming from the abandoned house behind their home. The sound was like someone knocking on a wall. I drove my patrol car there. The abandoned house had been there for a long time. The former owner had died many years ago. With no heirs, it was just left to rot. I parked my car and walked into the yard. The weeds were knee-high, and the air was heavy with the smell of mold. I listened, but there was no sound. Maybe the family was mistaken. But as I was about to leave, a faint knocking sound echoed from below. I quickly grabbed my flashlight and some lock-picking tools from the car. I walked inside and felt the wooden floor creak beneath my feet. Searching the first floor, I discovered a secret door under the stairs, locked with a padlock the size of my fist. The strange thing was that the lock was brand new. I used bolt cutters to break the lock. The door opened, revealing a steep wooden staircase leading into the darkness. A strong, foul odor hit me, and I had to cover my nose. "Is anyone here?" My voice echoed down and disappeared into the silence. But then I heard a noise. I slowly walked down. A small room with a low ceiling and no windows gradually appeared. I was shocked to see 3 figures huddled in the corner. A woman and 2 children. All 3 were thin, like skeletons wrapped in skin. The woman looked at me with a look of disbelief. Then she crawled to my feet, grabbed my pants, and sobbed, "Please, please save us." I quickly sat down to comfort the woman. The 2 children, a boy and a girl, just looked at me with scared eyes. I immediately called for an ambulance. While waiting, I shined my flashlight around the room. The walls were covered with etchings. They had carved a line for each day that passed. There were also scrawled messages, pleas for help, and cries for rescue. A bucket in the corner served as a toilet. There were some old, rotting mattresses on the floor, a few cans of food and bottles of water. The medical team arrived and quickly took the woman and the 2 children away. I stayed at the scene with the investigation team. We found a notebook under a mattress. The yellowed pages documented the horror the victims had endured. The first page read, "My name is Leah Porter. Today is the first day I've been held here. If anyone finds this diary..." My mind immediately started racing when I read that line. Leah Porter was a girl who went missing 9 years ago when she was just 16. I had been part of that investigation. The case had been unsolved until today. I continued to read the following pages. She wrote about every day of her captivity, how she was kidnapped on her way home from school. She was locked in here and endured all kinds of physical and mental torture. The 2 children were the kidnappers. She tried to protect them, teaching them to read and write with charcoal on the walls. It was heartbreaking, and I admired Leah's resilience. While examining the scene, a sudden engine noise and a loud screech of tires drew everyone's attention. I looked and immediately recognized the car as belonging to Craig, my best friend. Craig got out of the car, his face as pale as if he had just seen a ghost. I was surprised and asked him what he was doing here, but Craig's eyes were fixed on the ambulance where Leah was being cared for. He stood there like a stone statue for a few seconds. I saw his hands trembling, and he swallowed hard. Then he suddenly turned and ran. I had a bad feeling and ran after him, calling his name. Craig heard me calling and ran faster. I lunged and tackled Craig right in front of his car. "Why are you here, Craig?" He didn't answer, just looked at me with the eyes of a person caught red-handed. When I tackled Craig, a key fell out of his pocket. I handed it to an officer, and the key could open the lock I had just broken. In that moment, my world came crashing down. This abandoned house was only 2 blocks away from Craig's house. The key to the cellar was too new for the age of the house. And most importantly, Craig was the only person I had ever told about Leah Porter's disappearance 9 years ago. He once asked me why the police couldn't find anything. Now I knew the reason. Craig knew because he was the one who hid her. I wanted to punch my best friend, whom I had trusted for 20 years, but I just stood there trembling, watching Craig get handcuffed. I realized how wrong I had been. I had trusted Craig, invited him to my house often, and let him be close to my daughter. I considered Craig my brother, while he was torturing a high school girl and 2 children just a few miles away. In the interrogation room, Craig admitted everything. He confessed to stalking Leah for months before kidnapping her, using the abandoned house as a place of confinement. DNA evidence confirmed he was the father of the 2 children. Leah's diaries, secretly taken photos, and personal belongings found in Craig's house solidified his guilt. With undeniable evidence, Craig was charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and rape. Sitting there, reading his statement, I felt suffocated. It took me a long time to sign the arrest warrant for my best friend. I sat in my office for a long time, feeling empty. I still couldn't believe what was happening. Craig is now awaiting trial. Leah and her 2 children are receiving medical and psychological care, slowly learning how to live again. As for me, I'm still the police chief of Sedona, but every night, as I patrol the quiet streets I once believed I knew so well, I wonder how many other secrets are hiding behind closed doors.